The year is 1950. Within the decade, the university's student population will double, rising from approximately 14,000 to over 23,000 by 1960. The growing pace of the university's population outmatches its library infrastructure, which at this point is a relic of the 19th century. The Sigmund Samuel Library contained the largest collection on campus, holding over 300,000 books, far over its maximum capacity. In 1962, the university would open New College, adding capacity for almost 1,800 new students. In 1964, yet another college would follow, Innis, adding an additional 2,000 students. By 1967, U of T was home to over 30,000 students, as the library's infrastructure fell even further out of date. While U of T itself was considered among the top 5 universities for undergraduate studies in North America, the UTS ranked 36th among its peers. The university's endless acquisitions of books, periodicals, microforms, and rare items had grown so unsustainable that St. Michael's was making space in Carr Hall for temporary bookholding, while Trinity did the same until the Larkin Building opened in 1961. To bring the libraries out of the past, the university would need to do something radical.
By the mid-1950s, it became obvious that within a decade, the university's central book collection would exceed the capacity of the Sigmund Samuel Library. To meet the needs of a rapidly growing university community with its increasing demands for library services, a detailed proposal for a new library was presented in 1965, and the designers and architects were retained. 3 years were spent in planning the 14 floors, 2 levels of basement, and the 2 adjoining wings which comprise the Robarts complex.
After 5 years of construction, Robarts would open in 1973. Coming in at a cost of over $260 million adjusted for inflation, Robarts would go on to be, and still continues to be, the largest research and academic library in Canada, and the 3rd largest of its kind in North America. The complex spans over 1 million square feet across 14 floors, housing numerous collections, a Department of Information, and a rare books library. As of 2022, the complex houses over 9.5 million books, periodicals, and microform records managed by a staff of over 680 specialists. This behemoth is a marvel of design and engineering, no doubt. Building Robarts is one thing, managing it is another. So the question begs itself, just what does it take to run Robarts for a day? Immediately after the opening, the university was faced with a problem. During the construction of Robarts, the university's administration had decided that only graduates and 4th-year undergraduate students would have access to the brand new stacks, a fraction of the student population. All other students in the university seeking to check books out would be relegated to the existing Sigmund Samuel Library, what is today the Gerstein Center. Most undergraduates saw this as an assault on their access to education.
Students are going, we go to this university, we pay these fees, we want access to information, and information is important for us to do our to study, but also to grow and to learn. Not having access to that space is kind of an old mentality, and we're ushering this new building in and we're keeping old practice. No, we're not going to stand for that, and we're going to march down to the president's office and demand access.
And so students from all across the university, and from all years of study, did just that. On the 11th of March, 1972, students would occupy the university's Senate chambers and administrative headquarters in Simcoe Hall for over 2 days. Just a year later, upon the library's opening, stack access was made available to all students.
It's gone from really a book space, and a restricted book space in many ways, to an open people space, right? So emphasis less on the physical objects that are books, but more on the people that can get you access to the information, whether that's in book form or digital form, right? And then the space to support you learning and collaborating and researching with colleagues, right?
Yeah.
So again, the kind of theme of the whole thing has been from book space to people space, and the opening up of the library and its services.
The person you've been hearing from so far is Thijs Klumpenhouwer, the university's chief archivist and director of UTARMS, the university's archive and record management service. They're the main reason why the history of the library, and the university at large, is so readily available. Even though they're a part of the library and of Robarts, the way that they work is much different. While the library collects, stores, and lends out books, UTARMS mainly focuses on collecting two distinct types of material: university records and private records.
That can come in many forms of records associated with that. So student records, HR records, committee meeting minutes, curriculum development material, all of that stuff that's deemed to have enduring, long-lasting value comes here to the university archives.
University records are basically any materials that were created by U of T to support and advance its overall mission. The private records, on the other hand, are dedicated to individuals who studied, taught, or researched at the university. Records of this type are called FONs, and the university's archives holds over 4,000 of them.
Faculty papers, prominent faculty members who have made contributions to their area of study, students who have graduated from the University of Toronto and gone on to do wonderful and amazing things, which there are many of. Campus groups who aren't, associated administratively with the University of Toronto, but have a presence here on campus.
And finally, UTARMS fulfills an important need to supplement archival content with print material.
So you can imagine things like calendars, which used to all be printed, of course, and now they're all online. Calendars, annual reports, newspapers, so Varsity, Gargoyle, all kinds of student newspapers as well.
Just downstairs from UTARMS is another department, also responsible for archiving historically significant materials. But with just one small difference. This is the Thomas Fisher Rare Books Library. It is responsible for housing and preserving over 800,000 historic books, volumes, and artistic pieces, and 4,500 linear meters of archival manuscripts. It is the largest rare books library of its kind in Canada, and among the 10 largest in the world. We spoke to the man in charge of overseeing this colossal library and its one-of-a-kind collection.
We are close to 800,000 volumes of printed material. And remember, we say volumes, not just books.
Right.
The book manifests in many formats, from papyri collections that we have to books as scrolls, including material in Hebrew or as part of the Judaica collections, medieval manuscripts in the codex format, going back to the 11th century, to the end of the Middle Ages in the 15th century, and all sorts of materials that are part of that definition of the book.
Right. This is David Fernández. He's the head of the Special Collections Department at the Thomas Fisher Rare Books Library. His responsibilities are broad. On any given day, his job involves leading the specialists and practitioners at the library in gathering, preserving, cataloging, and in some cases, making the extraordinary and unique items that the Fisher Wing houses available to the public. He also oversees the library's outreach programs, as well as all the teaching that requires access to rare items, be it at the graduate or undergraduate level.
Our collections are representative of the city of Toronto and of Canada in general. And so we can provide really meaningful opportunities for people to learn with materials that are here really for them.
Right.
To come visit and use in different ways. We have, undergraduate students who have produced original research, but after coming here to do research on colonial history, for example. We have graduate students who have developed entire theses or dissertations around manuscripts that are in the collection or archival collections as well. And we have members of the public, including artists and other creators, who have also used the collection as inspiration for their own work.
The way that these collections find their way into the Fisher Library is much different than how archival material makes its way into UTARMS. While the challenge with archival content is just how much of it there is to store and preserve, the opposite is true with volumes that make their way into the Fisher Library. To acquire these items, which will often be one of a kind, the library staff have to work with the people who happen to already own much of these materials, called donors.
So for a rare book library like the Fisher, we work with a community of donors and collectors who every year approach us to donate either funding or their own collections. We refer to them as gift in kind.
Okay.
So the library has an active acquisitions program with donors, so we are able to add hundreds of items every year as donations.
Okay. Once a given item is in the possession of the Fisher, the dozen or so preservations experts and conservators that are staffed by the library spring into action to protect it from the elements and repair any existing damage that it may have sustained during its long life. Afterwards, a decision is made on whether the item can be accessed by students or if it would be best left alone. This entire process can be incredibly expensive, not just in terms of the raw budget needed to run an operation of this scale and complexity, but also in terms of man-hours that need to be put in by the library's specialists. David highlighted to us just how important it is that libraries, and especially those with special collections, are supported by the broader community they exist within.
But if we want to create more opportunities and if we want to have a stronger impact in the work that a library like this can do at the community level, that means we need to invest more.
Consistent investment.
Exactly. And investment means also engagement from communities.
Right.
Investing time, investing effort in collaborating with your local librarians to ensure that at a time when libraries have been attacked by different groups, citizens are behind their libraries, and they're there to support. But for them to have that relationship, the library has to be a space that is really open for them.
While the archives in the Rare Books Library are an integral part of Robarts, a library's main function is, at the end of the day, to serve as a nexus for research, campus resources, and above all, to lend out books. While the management of Robarts' many services is undertaken by dozens of different departments, there's arguably one person who oversees and is responsible for everything that happens in the main body of Robarts and the entire UTL as a whole. That man is the university's chief librarian, Larry Alford.
So the chief librarian is responsible for the operations of the 40 plus libraries the university spends in direct costs, counting UTM and UTSC, about almost $100 million a year on libraries. About 40 million of that is spent to license and buy collections, and so a lot of my job is, the budget oversight. There are some 525 appointed staff, 300 to 400 student employees who work in the library, so 800-900 people, all of whom and all of which is here to serve teaching, learning, and research, to serve students.
As mentioned, Larry oversees all of the libraries in U of T across the three campuses, St. George, Mississauga, and Scarborough. And as impressive as some of the libraries across the university may be, Robarts still holds a special place in his heart.
I should, as an aside, say this is the largest library in Canada. And in some ways, I sometimes refer to it as the de facto National Library of Canada. So there is a national library, and it's a wonderful place. Yeah. But it collects mostly Canadian material, whereas we collect from all over the world, every language and culture virtually in the world. It has also been a leading edge library in terms of the use of technologies, going back to the 1960s and the most primitive of computers. Much of the automation in libraries started here, and automation in libraries actually started before it did in business processing, accounting, and all of that, very early in the 1960s.
This idea of a digital library features very heavily in Larry's overall vision, not just for Robarts, but for the UTL as a whole. However, he emphasized to us how Robarts' evolution into a digital library began long before he entered the job.
It seems sort of obvious now, but in the 1990s, when I was at the University of North Carolina, actually, that was when we first began to license electronic information. So before that, journals were in print, and if you wanted to use a journal, you came into the library and you read the print. That was the only way it was accessible. So much of that work began here as well as in other libraries in the 90s. But actually what I would say, and I alluded to this earlier, this library in 1961 or 62, under a previous chief librarian, a man named Bob Blackburn, actually pioneered the use of computers, so creating a digital library. So the first step was there was once card catalogs, and I know many people have never seen a card catalog, but they were these cabinets that held literally millions of cards in this library, which is how you knew where a book was, what its call number was, how you looked up by subject. They began to automate that process in the early 1960s, which was really the beginning, the first pioneering efforts in almost any library in the world in creating what became a digital library.
And of course, today, a majority of the library's acquisitions of vital materials takes place online and through digital means.
For the electronic collections, much of it now comes in large packages. So for example, the leading science and most expensive science, technical, engineering, medical, so STEM publishers is a Dutch company called Elsevier. Right. They publish something like 2,200 journals, and essentially through what have become their license agreements, they've become known in the library world as big deals. Every one of their journals is licensed, so we no longer select, we're going to get these 1,500 Elsevier titles out of their 2,200. We license them all. Because frankly, for a library at least like this one, it's cheaper and more efficient and provides more information to do it that way.
Right.
This emphasis on digital material has become a mandate that the entire UTL follows as a matter of principle.
Digitization is a great tool or approach for both preservation and access.
Right.
It provides another entry point. During the pandemic, for example, our active digitization program allowed us to continue to provide services to our various community of users by, investing in those technologies and in the work that goes behind making a book like this available online.
Right.
And once it's available online, the physical copy can take a break from usage. If the conservator thinks it shouldn't be handled unless it's absolutely necessary.
The difference, there are many differences between digital and paper, but paper we can throw in a box and we can throw it on the shelf and it'll last 100, 200 years, right? Acid-free folders, acid-free boxes, climate controlled. Right. It's good for a long time. Digital stuff, we don't have that luxury, right? You have a Word document that you produced a decade ago, that you can't access now because of version changes and software changes and hardware changes, right? Mm-hmm. So the short answer to the digital archiving question is we have to be more proactive, right? So we have to help donors, help offices create and store their digital information right from the outset in a way that's going to usher it through phases of its life that ensure that by the time they're done with it after 10 years of use in an office, that it's still in a format that allows us to preserve it here.
During our interview, Larry equated Robarts to a small village, and it truly is just that, a village within a city within a city. And what we heard from each of the insiders we interviewed reflected the perspective from 3 different corners of that village. While each perspective is somewhat different from the one before it, there's a common understanding that each of them shares, that their line of work is not just about running a library, or doing research, or even about the millions of books and volumes that they oversee. The library is, at the end of the day, about the people who use it.
Along with my colleagues, we continue to identify opportunities to open up the library in different ways.
Right.
To create new opportunities and spaces for members of the public, students, faculty, and anyone who's interested in using our collections for curiosity or for learning or creating new things.
It's our job and our hope to introduce students to what we've got here, to get them in the door at least once so that they don't feel scared coming in this kind of prestigious and dark looking building, and to realize that this material, we have 14 kilometers of archival material that's here for students' use, among others, to help them research, to spur ideas, to interest them, to give them experience going through original source material. And it doesn't even have to be focused on anything. If you want to come in and see Harold Innis's papers because you read one of his books in one of your courses, you can do that, right? If you want to come in and see Ursula Franklin's research data from some of her metallurgy work, you can come in and see that. Or if you want to see why this laneway is named after Ursula Franklin, you come in here and see her papers just for interest's sake. There's no requirements.
I think what sets them apart are extraordinary staff who really are dedicated to sort of the student experience, to supporting research, but also to preserving sort of the record of human knowledge and culture, and not just sort of Western and Canadian culture, but where appropriate, all cultures, so that people have access to that information and preserving it, not for the current generation of students and faculty, but so it's here 200 years from now. I think that that's really important, that libraries actually are the sort of cultural storehouse for humanities.